Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling a linguistic challenge that is, well, I think it's perhaps the most universally frustrating experience in language learning, hitting that B2 wall in English listening comprehension.
If you're listening to this, you have almost certainly felt that profound sense of being stuck. You can read, you can write, you can even speak pretty functionally. But the moment a native speaker starts talking at a natural, unscripted speed, your brain just lags.
It totally lags, and that feeling of understanding, say, 90% of the words but missing 100% of the meaning, that is the B2 wall.
And we really want you to know, this frustration is not some kind of personal failure. It's a completely normal neurological bottleneck.
Absolutely. It's like you've successfully climbed the lower rungs of the ladder, you can navigate survival situations. But suddenly, right around that B2 upper intermediate stage, the progress just grinds to a halt.
It does. It feels exactly like you've climbed a really steep incline, only to find a solid, sheer brick wall waiting for you at the top.
Exactly, a brick wall.
And we have to start by acknowledging a foundational problem here. Listening comprehension is, well, it's often cited as the hardest skill to truly conquer. And that's because it demands total, unreserved automaticity. It requires your brain to process huge amounts of complex information instantly.
Because of the biggest constraint, right? The real-time factor.
Precisely. The biggest, most unforgiving constraint is that listening happens strictly in real time.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. If you think about how much control you have over reading, when you read an article or a book, you are completely in charge.
Total control.
You set the pace, you can pause, you can physically go back and reread a confusing sentence 10 times if you need to. You can even open a dictionary and look up every single word without any penalty.
But spoken communication, especially at a natural fast speed, it offers none of that security. You cannot press pause on your colleague. You can't rewind the news anchor.
Not at all.
And if your attention drifts for just a fraction of a second, or if your brain gets caught trying to consciously translate one complex phrasal verb, you don't just miss that one item, you miss the context of the whole phrase, then the crucial sentence that follows it. And suddenly, you are just relentlessly playing catch-up, scrambling to reconstruct meaning from fragments.
And that leads to what you call the snowball effect of comprehension failure.
That's exactly it. One missed detail, maybe one key idiom, and it snowballs. You lose the next piece of context, which means you miss the speaker's main conclusion. By the time you even realize you're lost, the conversation has moved on 3 topics. It's just utterly exhausting.
It sounds exhausting.
So our mission today is to give you a roadmap through this difficulty. We're going to use the CEFR, that's the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, as our structural guide. We'll map proficiency from A1 survival all the way up to C2 mastery.
Okay, so we have 3 clear goals for this deep dive. First, we need to establish the exact cognitive demands at each level, defining what it is that truly makes listening so hard.
Right. Second, and this is the most critical part, we need an intensive analysis of that frustrating B2 level. We'll explain the precise 5-point cognitive shifts that define that barrier.
And finally, we will give you concrete, actionable strategies. And I mean, not just passive listen more advice. We're talking about real techniques to actively train your brain to climb over that wall.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's unpack this and build our foundation. Where do we start?
We start by defining the framework we'll use for self-diagnosis.
Before we start climbing that CEFR ladder, let's talk about what proficiency actually is, because we often assume it's just about vocabulary. But you've argued that listening success is, well, it's a multidimensional analysis of interlocking skills.
Precisely. If you're struggling, just listening more isn't always enough. It's often not the right kind of listening. Understanding these 5 dimensions is crucial for effective self-diagnosis.
So you can move past that vague feeling of, I just don't get it. Exactly. Instead of that vague and frankly defeating statement, I just don't understand English, you need to be able to pinpoint the problem. You need to be able to say, okay, I got lost because the speaker's speed combined with the topic's complexity completely overloaded my short-term memory.
That's a much more powerful place to be. Okay, so let's detail those 5 factors that determine listening success, and crucially, what cognitive leap they demand from the learner.
The first factor is the most obvious one, but its neurological demand it's critically underestimated, and that's speed of speech.
Okay.
This tracks the enormous, challenging transition from needing slow, deliberate, almost robotic articulation, the kind of clear, isolated voice you hear in a beginner textbook audio file.
I know that voice very well.
We all do. The transition from that to processing completely natural, fast-paced, flowing conversation.
And that transition from segmented audio to real-life speed is where the panic button first gets pushed for learners, isn't it? The brain has been trained on this ideal version, and suddenly it's facing reality.
It is, and the demand is neurological. Your brain has to shift from processing language through the, let's call it the conscious translation center, where you're deliberately matching sound to a definition in your head, to processing it instantly through the recognition center. Until you build that neural pathway, the sheer speed will just defeat you.
Okay, so speed is number one. Factor number two addresses the diversity of speakers. This sounds like it's about tolerance for variation.
It is, absolutely. At the A levels, you are almost always guaranteed to hear a standardized, neutral voice, the safest, clearest voice possible. But as you progress, especially towards B2 and beyond, the framework demands you handle a wide array of regional accents.
So not just American versus British.
Oh, much more than that. We're talking about handling a thick Scottish accent, the Australian cadence, or a strong Irish rhythm.
And it's not only native accents, right? I mean, you need to be able to understand non-native speakers who have their own distinct pronunciation patterns and rhythm that are very different from the textbook model.
That's a vital point. Your mental filter has to become phonetically flexible. You have to learn to accept variation, background noise, and approximation, not just textbook purity. If your brain is wired to reject anything that doesn't match the one voice you trained on, you will fail in the real world.
Okay, that makes sense. That brings us to factor number three, context and topic complexity. I'm guessing this is where the mental energy and abstract thought really start getting taxed.
Exponentially so. The question here is, are you restricted to understanding concrete, familiar, everyday things, like ordering coffee or describing your trip? Or can you successfully navigate specialized discussions that move into the abstract?
Things like technical explanations or nuanced policy arguments.
Exactly, or historical analysis. The density of the topic and the conceptual brain power required increases massively as you move up that ladder.
I think the fourth factor is the one that causes the most frustration because it feels a bit unfair. It's audio quality. It has nothing to do with whether you know the words or not.
Yes, the CEFR actually tests your tolerance for acoustic challenges. Do you rely on crystal clear studio sound, or can you handle the messy realities of life? We are talking about listening to a colleague on a terrible cell phone connection where half the words are clipped.
Or a speaker in a crowded cafe with competing chatter, or a poor quality video call.
All of it. And that demands a powerful cognitive ability to filter that interference and focus only on the signal. Your brain is doing heavy-duty noise cancellation work that has nothing to do with the language itself. You are using up valuable cognitive bandwidth just to hear the words.
Right, before you even start processing them.
And finally, we have the fifth factor, length and complexity of discourse. This really boils down to sheer linguistic stamina and memory. Can you only follow a quick two-sentence exchange, or can you maintain comprehension and focused concentration through extended content?
So like tracking a 6-minute university lecture where the speaker never pauses, or following a detailed product presentation, or maybe maintaining focus through a 10-minute debate with multiple speakers where arguments are woven together, refuted, and then reintroduced.
That's the challenge, and this comprehensive framework is so crucial for you, the learner. By looking at these 5 dimensions, speed, diversity, complexity, quality, and length, you transform your passive frustration into actionable, targeted practice. You can now define your weaknesses, which is the very first step to improving your listening skill.
Okay, let's start at A1, the absolute beginner. This is all about simple survival.
Yes, at A1, the comprehension focus is strictly on understanding very slow, very clearly articulated speech. The speaker is actively helping the learner. They're providing huge pauses, speaking deliberately, and using a lot of redundancy.
And the topics are always tied to immediate needs, right? Basic instructions, personal information, predictable transactional scenarios. The cognitive load is kept intentionally minimal.
Think about our classic A1 example, the hotel check-in. The whole environment is engineered for your success. The receptionist is highly supportive. The dialogue is structured to be short, simple, and totally predictable.
A sample dialogue is really illuminating here. It's like, welcome, can I have your last name? Followed by a slow, intentional pause. Could you spell that for me, please? Another pause. Your room is number 302. Here is your key card.
And notice the crucial structure there. Each question isolates one simple piece of information at a time. Your brain only has to handle name, then spelling, then room number. The memory load is basically zero.
And the vocabulary name, room, key, welcome, it's all concrete, directly linked to physical objects you can see.
Exactly. And the A1 test format mirrors this. The answers are direct and verbatim. If the audio says the coffee shop closes at 4 o'clock, the question is simply, what time does the coffee shop close? Zero inference required.
Okay, so that's A1. Moving up to A2, elementary level. Here the learner is starting to find their balance.
Yes. They can handle slightly quicker speech and a wider range of common high-frequency expressions, but they still rely very heavily on clear articulation.
And the major step up here is that the A2 listener can now follow short narratives, like a brief personal story, and they can integrate multiple facts together. They can handle a two-step instruction, not just a one-step one.
The focus expands to simple descriptions of routines, people, or places. Sentences become a little more grammatically complex, maybe introducing simple past tense narratives or future plans.
Let's use the A2 restaurant reservation example. How does this challenge the listener more than the A1 check-in?
Well, it introduces choice and a little bit of negotiation. The server might say, we have a table free near the window or one in the corner. Which location would you prefer? Now, the interaction involves comparing two possibilities and making a preference-based decision.
So the listener isn't just passively recording data anymore. They are actively processing variables, window, corner, preference, and giving a synthesized response. That shift requires slightly faster processing and more short-term memory use.
Exactly. And the A2 test formats reflect that need to connect cause and effect. Think about a voicemail example. Hi, it's Tom. I can't attend the meeting in the morning because I have a dentist appointment at 11 a.m. I can only meet in the afternoon.
So the question would be something like, why can't Tom attend in the morning? You have to connect his inability to attend the effect with the specific stated reason, which is the dentist appointment.
You got it. You have to understand the relationship between two facts, not just recall the facts in isolation.
Okay, this brings us to B1, the intermediate threshold. And this is where the functional safety wheels truly come off, isn't it? A B1 learner can survive in the language, but the challenges start getting, well, systemic.
Yes. This is the entry point where you're expected to understand the main points of clear standard speech, but with a big condition, provided the topics are familiar. We're talking about routine conversations about work, school, travel, or the news.
So a B1 listener should now be able to follow the main idea of a news broadcast on a familiar topic, understand most standard TV or radio programs, if the language isn't too dense or accented.
Right. And they should be able to participate in discussions on routine professional topics without needing constant repetition.
Is the biggest challenge at B1 really just the sheer amount of new vocabulary, or is it something else? Is it that we're expected to instantly recognize non-literal language like idioms and phrasal verbs, even though they make zero sense literally?
That is the core neurological hurdle at B1. It is the immediate introduction to non-compositional meaning. Let's go back to that workplace meeting example. The manager says, I wanted to touch base about the project. How is that schedule coming along? We need to sort out the final deliverables and follow up by Friday.
Okay, so an A2 learner, using pure translation, hears touch and base as separate things, and their brain tries to construct a literal image, maybe a baseball diamond. It fails, and the learner loses the entire sentence.
Precisely. The B1 learner has to instantly process touch base as a single concept, meaning communicate briefly. And there's so many others. Common phrasal verbs like call off, meaning cancel, take down, meaning record, figure out, meaning solve a problem, and put off, meaning postpone. They're all non-literal.
They're the functional glue of native speech, and if you miss them, you miss the speaker's actual intention.
And the dialogue structure is far more complex than A2. The B1 listener is forced to track a whole structured scenario. First, the statement of intent, to touch base. Second, the status report, how it's coming along. Third, the required action, sort out. And fourth, the timeline. By Friday, you're tracking 4 sequential steps across an entire conversation.
And on top of all that, B1 is where subtle inference starts to creep in.
Yes, it is. When the manager says, that could be a problem, can we bring in someone else? The B1 listener needs to register that and the accompanying tonal shift as a signal of concern. The manager didn't say, I am dissatisfied, but the implication is pretty clear.
So the B1 listener has to start interpreting tone and context, not just the words. And as you mentioned, the length and the data retrieval challenge increases dramatically.
It does. B1 test scenarios are designed to test sustained focus. We see complex phone menu systems or lengthy directions. Welcome to Citibank. For your account balance, press 1. For credit card services, press 2. To open a new account, press 3. To report a lost card, press 4 immediately. That audio can go on for 30 seconds, and you have to hold all those options in your short-term memory.
And the question's always tricky, like, what's the fastest way to get help if your card is missing? You have to retrieve the relevant detail, press 4 immediately, while ignoring the other 3 banking options. That data retrieval under time pressure is the final B1 challenge before hitting that wall.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the core challenge, the B2 barrier. If you can handle B1, you can function, you can survive. But that transition to upper intermediate, it feels like a sudden stop.
Yeah.
It's that infamous intermediate plateau.
It is. The requirements shift dramatically here. It's no longer about how many words you know. It's about the quality of that knowledge, total mastery, and instant automatic recognition. It demands a cognitive quantum leap, shifting from conscious decoding to pure fluency.
Okay, let's detail the 5 major converging challenges that make the B2 frustration point so sharp. We'll start with the most aggressive one, unscripted speed and connected speech.
Yes. At B2, you are exposed to completely natural, unscripted speed where that clear, deliberate articulation is permanently gone. You're hearing native speakers talking to each other, not performing for a language learner. And this includes normal hesitation, false starts, and critically rapid connected speech.
I think connected speech is often the single biggest destroyer of confidence for B2 learners, because the learner's ear is hearing a sound that doesn't correspond to the way they learned the individual words.
Absolutely. The learner has learned the dictionary pronunciation, but the reality is much, much messier due to phonological blending. And this involves a few phenomena that cause a lot of confusion. The first is called elision, which is where unstressed syllables or sounds just disappear entirely. For instance, the phrase, "I'm going to go to the store," is almost never articulated that fully. At native speed, it often becomes, "I'm going to go to the store."
Or even simpler, like chocolate often becomes chocolate. The middle vowel just vanishes.
It's gone. Or what about a common phrase like, "Did you eat?" If you learn the word slowly, you hear 4 distinct syllables. But naturally, that blends into, "Did you eat?" The separate words are gone.
Did you eat? Right.
Exactly. And another crucial blend is assimilation. This is where a sound changes because of the sound right next to it. For example, "what do you mean?" sounds nothing like its written form. The T often merges with the D and the Y sound, making it sound closer to "what do you mean?" If you haven't trained your ear to recognize "whata" instantly as "what to do," your brain just stalls.
So the B2 listener has to train their ear to recognize these rapid, instant phonological blends. If you pause to consciously think, wait, that was a 2 sound, but it sounded like a D sound, you've already lost the next crucial piece of information. Conscious thought is just too slow for connected speech.
Way too slow. The second challenge is the huge cognitive shift to abstract and complex topics. The B1 world was anchored in the physical and the routine. B2 forces you into purely intellectual, specialized, and conceptual topics.
We're moving into things like university lectures, deep news analysis, or discussions about the philosophy of art, historical revisionism, or economic models. The vocabulary shifts from practical verbs to specialized academic, conceptual, and often Latin root language.
Which leads right into the third challenge, varied accents and registers. The requirement is no longer just understanding if you hear the words, but understanding the argument no matter who is speaking or how they are speaking.
This means navigating heavy regional accents that radically change vowel sounds and speech rhythm. But it also includes code switching, so understanding formal technical language used in a presentation versus the rapid-fire slang used in an informal social gathering.
Your phonetic flexibility has to be robust enough to handle both a formal lecture on quantum physics and an argument between 2 friends where they're using complex slang and high-context cultural references.
Okay, challenge number 4 is truly the defining hurdle for upper intermediate learners, I think. Implicit meaning and inference. The vast majority of B2 learners struggle because they are still stuck on understanding only the literal words.
And the B2 demand is to detect subtle attitude, emotion, persuasive intent, and speaker bias, all the things that are not explicitly stated. You need to read between the lines, and you need to do it instantly.
So we're talking about recognizing sarcasm, irony, subtle disappointment, or even passive aggression purely from shifts in intonation, stress patterns, and context. That skill takes enormous linguistic fluency because your brain needs to be free from just decoding words to analyzing the intent behind them.
And finally, the sheer cognitive weight of length and sustained attention. B2 materials get significantly longer. We're often talking 5 to 8 minutes of uninterrupted, dense speech.
This is a test of memory and stamina. You have to maintain intense concentration, track multiple interwoven arguments, hold complex ideas in your short-term memory for long periods, and connect an idea from minute 1 of a monologue to the conclusion at minute 7. Your brain just gets rapidly exhausted under that kind of sustained cognitive load.
It does. Let's illustrate how these 5 hurdles converge. Let's use a demanding B2 real-world example. An environmental policy debate discussing carbon taxes versus cap and trade.
Okay, this scenario is brutal because it's abstract, it's technical, and it's full of complex comparison. The first hurdle is just the specialized vocabulary. You're immediately hit with terms like carbon pricing mechanisms, price certainty, and the highly academics internalize the externalities.
Let's simplify that jargon for a moment, because this is where the B2 brain stalls. When policy experts say internalize the externalities, they mean forcing a company to pay for the pollution or damage they create, rather than letting the public or environment pay for it. If the B2 learner pauses to try and figure out what externalities means literally, well, they've just missed the entire next segment of the argument.
Wait, so even if I know 90% of the words in this policy debate, the simple political use of the word tax or a dense economic concept is enough to throw me off the meaning of the entire argument. That feels grossly unfair.
It is, but that's the reality of B2. And the structure is also highly demanding. The listener is forced to track a comparison between 2 opposing policy goals. One side favors taxes because they offer price certainty for businesses, they know the cost, while the other side favors cap and trade because it guarantees quantity certainty, they know the maximum level of pollution.
So you're processing a whole debate structure about the trade-offs between 2 complex goals, forcing constant cognitive comparison.
Yeah.
And then comes the inference test, the layer that isn't about economics at all, but about political nuance.
Exactly. When an expert notes that the word tax is often toxic in public discourse, the B2 learner must infer that the speaker is not discussing the economic value of the policy, but the political rhetoric, public opinion, and feasibility. They have to connect the literal words to the implied political reality of implementation.
And then, just to make it harder, the conversation throws in complex idioms. When the interviewer calls this entire dilemma the million-dollar question, the listener has to instantly recognize that this is an idiom meaning the most critical and difficult issue to solve, and it has nothing to do with actual money.
And that sums it up perfectly. A B2 learner is constantly juggling abstract vocabulary, complex structure, political nuance, high-speed delivery, and instant idiom recognition. It is the convergence of all 5 of these factors all happening in real time that makes that wall feel so incredibly solid.
It's crucial to discuss the psychology here because the B2 barrier is often more demotivating than it is difficult. Why does this level feel so much harder psychologically than, say, cruising through B1?
Well, there are 4 profound psychological traps at play. The first, as we've detailed, is the immense increased cognitive load. At B1, your brain focused on one main task, comprehending the message. At B2, your brain is doing 4 things at once. It's decoding fast, connected speech, translating conceptual vocabulary, tracking a long argument structure, and making inferences about attitude. Your brain is running a marathon while solving complex math problems. It's simply overwhelmed.
And the second trap is what we could call the good enough trap. Once a learner hits B1, they achieve functional communication. The immediate intense pressure is released. They can travel comfortably, they can handle simple workplace interactions, and their sense of immediate need just disappears.
The survival pressure is gone, and that reduces the intense, primal motivation needed to push into the painful, deliberate, high-effort work required for B2. Why suffer through advanced political theory when you can happily order a meal? The answer is that to truly master the language, you have to suffer through it.
And the third factor is probably the most soul-crushing for ambitious learners: diminishing returns. At the A levels, your progress was so visible, so linear. You learned a list of words, you used them immediately, and you saw instant improvement.
But from B1 to B2, you might dedicate 50 hours of study specifically to listening, and yet feel like you have made no measurable progress in following those complex debates. This is where many, many learners quit.
But why does the progress seem to vanish? Is the work not effective?
The work is effective, but the gains are subtle and nonlinear. Think about physical training. When you first start running, you might lose weight and see massive fitness gains very quickly. But once you hit a plateau, the next improvements are subtle. A fraction of a second shaved off your mile time, or a slightly stronger heart things you can't see in the mirror. The skills you're building at B2 nuance detection, total automaticity, instant phonological recognition, are just like that. They take much longer to build, and they're cumulative. That perceived lack of progress is highly damaging to motivation because the learner mistakes a slow, subtle neurological skill build for complete stalling. The payoff is massive, but it often comes suddenly after a long, frustrating period of what feels like invisible accumulation.
That really helps put the frustration into context. And finally, you mentioned having to face the full force of messy English.
Yes, B2 is full immersion. It's dense with idioms, colloquialisms, slang, and cultural references. The language is less predictable and less standardized than anything you've encountered before. And most critically, there is zero time for that internal translation process you relied upon at the A and B levels.
So the conceptual bridge to your native language has to come down. You have to begin understanding and processing concepts directly in English. If you still have to internally translate touch base into your native tongue before you understand communicate briefly, you will fail at B2 speed. This is a massive cognitive reorganization.
It is.
Okay, so if B2 is the wall, C1 is having the tools, the cognitive processing power, to climb over it and operate with near-native competence, even in highly demanding situations.
C1 is the level of advanced proficiency and high independence. The core ability here is understanding, demanding longer conversations, and consistently recognizing deep implicit meaning and the highly nuanced structure of an argument.
So what key listening skills does a C1 learner possess that a B2 learner is still struggling with?
Well, a C1 listener can handle complex technical or academic subjects even when they're outside their own professional field. They can comfortably watch media that's loaded with high-level idioms, and they can follow fast, puzzled group discussions where people are interrupting each other, changing topics, and negotiating meaning all at the same time.
And most importantly, they consistently recognize the subtle irony, satire, and rhetorical strategies that a B2 listener would likely miss completely or just take literally.
Yes. Let's analyze that C1 real-world example, the algorithmic bias discussion. The topic is immediately abstract and intellectually dense. The vocabulary is challenging. Perpetuate historical discrimination, codifying that bias, the veneer of objectivity.
And the C1 learner doesn't just need to know those words. They need to instantly grasp the underlying philosophical and sociological concepts that those words represent. And the dialogue itself is dynamic, not some clean monologue.
Not at all. The speakers are debating rapidly, using sophisticated natural idioms like play devil's advocate to argue for the sake of argument, or track record for history of performance, or keep humans in the loop to mean maintain human supervision. They're using these to negotiate their positions.
And the C1 listener has to track constantly shifting viewpoints. For instance, following the subtle intellectual difference between arguing that algorithms merely reflect existing human bias versus arguing that they actively amplify that bias because of machine learning structures.
The speed and the sheer weight of these abstract ideas require that the language processing itself is effortless. The listener's brain is free to analyze the complex ideas, not struggle with the grammar or the speed.
Okay, moving to C2 level. Native-like mastery, the absolute summit of proficiency. What does true, effortless comprehension actually look like?
It means you understand virtually any form of spoken language. Live conversation, scripted broadcasts, highly specialized professional or academic discourse, even when it's delivered at extremely fast native speed. This mastery extends to understanding heavily accented, colloquial, or dialectal speech that would still trip up most C1 learners.
So C2 is defined by the full appreciation of cultural and social nuance. This means understanding humor, complex wordplay, puns, and deeply embedded cultural references. You're also picking up on subtle social dynamics like power imbalances or nervousness, purely from someone's tone of voice and linguistic choices.
That's right. Let's use the C2 example of a writer's workshop, a meta-discussion about the craft of writing. The workshop leader might push back on a student's feedback by referencing the narrative techniques of literary figures like Peter Stamm or Virginia Woolf.
Right, and the C2 listener doesn't just hear the names. They immediately activate their cultural literacy. They know that Woolf, for instance, pioneered stream of consciousness narrative. If the discussion is about interiority versus external plot, referencing Woolf is shorthand for a very complex literary concept. The B2 listener just hears two names. The C2 listener understands the entire conceptual weight behind that reference.
And the conceptual density is unparalleled. The discussion might move into defining complex, abstract concepts, following extremely long, grammatically complex sentences that link things like suspense as a function of interiority versus suspense as a function of plot mechanics.
The intellectual density is far beyond C1. And critically, the testing for C1 and C2 reflects this shift toward high-level analytical thinking. B2 tests your ability to retrieve complex information. C1 and C2 test your ability to analyze and synthesize.
For that C1 algorithmic bias example, the question isn't what specific policy term did the speaker use, it's which speaker expressed skepticism about solving the problem and why. You have to interpret their subtle opinion, judge their rhetorical purpose, or distinguish fine nuances between similar concepts. The focus is entirely on the ideas, not the words.
We've defined the territory, and we've definitely acknowledged the struggle. Now let's transition to the practical targeted strategies the learner needs to climb that ladder. The B2 wall is real, but now we need the specific tools to dismantle it. Let's start with the foundation for those who are still building structure.
For A1 and A2, the priority is predictability and recognition. The best strategy is repetitive listening. Listen to the same short dialogue or video clip, ideally no more than 60 seconds, 5 to 10 times. Your brain needs that repeated, concentrated exposure to map the sound to the written structure, creating those reliable neural pathways.
And always stick to materials with full visual support or a transcript. This connects the sound you hear to the word you know, and it stabilizes the learning process. For now, prioritize perfectly clear articulation over speed. Build reliability first.
Right. Now, for B1 learners, they're transitioning into independence. They need a strategic mix of support and complexity. Start incorporating authentic materials, but manage the cognitive load by using a rather clever technique.
How do you manage that load?
You listen to news or podcasts about subjects you are already deeply familiar with in your native language. Maybe you're a history buff or a fan of a specific sports team. This allows your brain to focus entirely on decoding the new language structures, the idioms, and the speed, without struggling to understand the subject matter itself.
That makes so much sense. The cognitive capacity that would normally be used for understanding the new content is now freed up to focus entirely on the new language.
Exactly. And this is the stage to intentionally build stamina. Consciously practice following a 5-minute segment of authentic material, like a short TED Talk, without hitting pause. Force yourself to resist the urge to stop the audio when you miss a detail. You must train your brain to keep moving forward.
Okay, this is the main event. If you are stuck at B2, what specific targeted practice can force that cognitive quantum leap? This stage requires highly deliberate, often uncomfortable practice.
First, varied content types are non-negotiable. Stop listening only to structured, safe interviews. Actively seek out dense, high-complexity content. Unscripted university lectures, formal political debates, or panel discussions with multiple interrupting speakers. You need to push your tolerance for abstract topics and acoustic chaos.
And to address the connected speech problem directly, how do we train the ear to recognize phonological blends like, what do you mean?
You need dedicated phonological practice using dictation and transcription. Use short, challenging clips 30 seconds to a minute of dense speech. The goal is to write down exactly what you hear, not what you think the words should be.
I can see how that would be uncomfortable.
It is, because you will repeatedly fail to hear the dictionary spelling. But when you check the transcript and realize you wrote gotcha instead of got you, it forces your brain to acknowledge the reality of sound reduction rather than passively filtering it out.
Okay, next, for inference training, which is the hardest skill to build, you highly recommend the muted scene technique.
I do. This trains your brain to look past the words. Watch a short, dramatic movie or TV scene with the volume completely off for 2 or 3 minutes. Based only on body language, facial expressions, and context, guess the character's attitude, emotional state, and their relationship to the other person.
And then you watch it again with the sound on. And you check if your nonverbal interpretation matched the tone and the dialogue. This trains your brain to synthesize verbal and nonverbal cues, which is absolutely vital for detecting sarcasm or persuasive intent that isn't explicitly stated.
Accent exposure is also non-negotiable at B2. If you have primarily trained on one specific accent, switch immediately. Listen daily to a news broadcast from the BBC, an Australian documentary, or a podcast featuring heavy regional American accents. Your phonetic flexibility must adapt to handle variation.
And finally, a key structural tool. mastering discourse markers.
Yes. Focus on recognizing structural transition words and phrases like consequently, on the contrary, furthermore, to summarize, notwithstanding, or nevertheless. These are linguistic signposts that alert your brain to the logical flow of the argument.
Ah, so they help you track the complexity and logical leaps of long discussions. If you hear, on the contrary, you know the speaker's about to present a counterargument, and your brain can prepare for that conceptual shift.
Exactly.
It's a lot of active engagement.
Right.
How do we structure the practice so it's effective and doesn't lead to immediate burnout?
For any challenging B2 content, I highly recommend the triple listen rule. This moves you from passive listening to active, targeted learning.
Okay, walk us through the 3 steps. What's the goal of the first pass?
The first listen is only for the gist. You must actively ignore the missed words and focus only on 2 questions. What is the main topic, and what is the speaker's main purpose? This prevents cognitive overload, and it builds forward momentum.
And the second time through.
The second listen focuses entirely on the structure and main arguments. You track those discourse markers we mentioned, and you identify the examples and supporting points the speaker uses. Take rough, non-detailed notes, just keywords or symbols, to follow the logical flow of the argument from start to finish.
So the first time is, what is it about? The second time is, how is the argument organized? And the third
listen is where you now focus on the details and vocabulary. This is the deep analysis pass. Now you can look up that tricky phrasal verb, analyze that specific idiom, or check the sound reduction that confused you during your dictation practice. This iterative process builds learning without overwhelming your brain on the first try.
I like that. And finally, you have a rule to protect motivation while still pushing yourself.
Yes, the 70% comprehensible rule. This is your psychological safety net.
Where's that sweet spot for learning?
If the material is too easy, say 95% comprehensible, you're not improving your processing speed. If it's too hard, like 30% comprehensible, you damage your motivation because you feel totally lost. The sweet spot is around 70%. That feeling of struggle where you missed a chunk but can still piece together the main idea, that is the exact tension where the most effective neurological learning happens.
So the struggle is literally the indicator that you are outside your comfort zone and actually making gains. If your practice feels easy, you need to find harder material.
And just briefly, for C1 and C2 learners who are just polishing that final layer, the strategy shifts to full, unsupported immersion. Drop the subtitles, stop pausing, and seek out highly specialized niche content that is outside your field of expertise. For example, a physics lecture for someone who is a humanities expert. You're aiming for maximum efficiency, speed, and cultural recognition, ensuring that comprehension is truly automatic.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We have. We've traced the evolution of listening from A1 survival all the way to C2 automaticity with a really serious focus on that B2 bottleneck. And it is so essential to internalize this. Finding B2 difficult is not a personal failure, it is a neurological certainty. It is the definitive inflection point where the focus shifts from just functional communication to nuanced high-speed comprehension.
You're moving from just getting by to truly understanding the full richness and speed of the language. And that just takes time for your brain to rewire. You're demanding that your brain create entirely new processing shortcuts that bypass conscious translation.
And taking the long view is essential for maintaining your motivation during that slow, frustrating climb. Remember that every single learner who has reached C1 or C2 felt the exact same way you do right now. They stared at that plateau and wondered if they had stalled forever.
Progress is rarely linear in deep listening. You won't see dramatic results every single day, but the progress is powerfully cumulative. Every painful, difficult 5-minute segment you push through is building the crucial neural infrastructure for effortless understanding later on.
So let's finish with the key principles for success at this challenging stage. First, consistency beats intensity. Focused, active practice for 30 minutes a day is far more effective than sporadic, exhausting 5-hour marathons that lead to burnout. Make active listening a daily habit.
Second, active engagement matters above all else. Do not let audio become background noise. You have to use active techniques. Dictation, note-taking, summarizing. Your brain has to be working to decode, not just passively hearing sound.
Third, and this helps with motivation, embrace discomfort. The struggle, the confusion, the frustration, that is the indicator that you are outside your comfort zone and actively learning. Do not run from the difficulty, seek it out.
Fourth, be patient. Listening is often the last skill to solidify. It takes time, especially recognizing speed and implicit meaning. You have to trust the process, even when the progress is invisible.
And finally, celebrate small victories. Did you manage to follow a complex argument for 7 minutes without pausing? Did you catch the sarcasm in someone's voice that you would have missed last month? Recognize that progress. Those small wins are the fuel that sustains you.
The ultimate goal, remember, is developing automaticity. You're aiming for a state where your brain processes the sound, the speed, the idiom, and the deep meaning instantly, without having to consciously translate any of it. That breakthrough is closer than you think, waiting just on the other side of that B2 wall.
Keep pushing forward. You are doing great work on a genuinely difficult skill.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into cracking the code of listening proficiency. We hope these strategies give you the tools you need to break through the plateau. Keep listening, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.